Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to today's meeting of the Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Mary Harland and I'll be chairing the meeting today. The Council continues to use Zoom to deliver remote committee meetings, and like our recent meetings, we will be continuing on this platform today. The meeting is being broadcast live on Leeds City Council YouTube channel, and I extend a warm welcome to anyone tuning in through YouTube. Today's agenda focuses on a number of areas that board members have raised in recent months, and I'm pleased that we've been able to get all three items on today's agenda. First, we'll look at how the Council has committed to fund Welcome to Yorkshire as the main tourism board for the region and a key driver that can hopefully assist our economy as we look to recover from COVID-19. Secondly, we have an item on council tax and business rates collection following requests for more information from board members at previous meetings. And lastly, we are taking a more detailed look at agile working in the council. Despite the wide-ranging impact of COVID, we have as an organisation adapted quickly and effectively to the challenge, and the report will look in detail at that, along with how staff and our estate have been impacted by new ways of working. As always, we have a number of guests in attendance to deal with any questions and present these items, and I'm really pleased to say James Mason, Chief Exec of Welcome to Yorkshire, is joining us today to deal with our first substantive item on Welcome to Yorkshire. Thank you for coming along, James. At this point, I'd like to invite each member of the board to formally introduce themselves. So please, I'll start with Councillor Almas. I'm afraid Councillor Almas is not able to hear what we're saying. So Councillor Almas represents the Holbeck, Beeston and Holbeck ward. Okay, Councillor Carlisle.
Morning everyone, Councillor Peter Carlisle, Carverley and Farsley ward.
Councillor Chapman.
Morning everybody, Councillor Chapman from Rothwell ward.
Councillor Firth.
Councillor Firth, Harewood ward.
Councillor Hayden.
Hi, Councillor Helen Hayden, Temple Newton ward.
Councillor Jenkins.
Councillor David Jenkins from Killingbeck and Seacroft ward.
Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jim McKenna, Armley ward.
Councillor Midgley.
Good morning, Councillor Morale Midgley from Kippax and Methley ward.
Councillor Robinson. Sorry, Matt.
Don't worry. Councillor Matthew Robinson, Harewood ward.
Councillor Seary.
Morning, Councillor Seary, Sam Seary, Putty ward.
Thank you, everybody. And now our guests, please. Councillor Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor James Lewis, Deputy Leader and Executive Board Member for Resources. And Chair, I was just thinking this is normally the meeting where we have our Christmas mince pies, isn't it? How the year's flown by.
It really is, yeah. I apologise for that not being the case, but we'll have to have virtual pies, and if I'd have thought on, I'd have picked a background with some particular reference to that, but I'm not that savvy, as you all know. Okay, Neil Evans.
Hello, Neil Evans, Director of Resources and Housing.
Victoria Bradshaw.
Hello everyone, Victoria Bradshaw, Chief Finance Officer for the Council.
Graham Sefton.
Good morning everyone, it's Graham Sefton. I work in the Council's HR team.
Is Tina Cooper here?
No, Tina gives her apologies, I'm afraid.
Okay, no worries. And James, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning everybody. James Mason from Welcome to Yorkshire. Bit early for the mince pies for me, Councillor Harland. A couple of weeks yet.
We don't meet in December, you see, so I usually bring them in November.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So moving up to the agenda then, can I ask our Governance Officer, Debbie Alden, to take us through the first 5 items of business, please?
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 1, there are no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Item 2, there's no exempt information. Item 3, there are no late items. Item 4, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? I'll take silence as there are none. And agenda item 5, we've received no apologies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, item 6. Just before we go to the minutes, I'd like to thank Councillor Helen Hayden for chairing last month's meeting in my absence. Really appreciated that she stood in at the last minute. Okay, matters arising. Councillor Robinson. Oh, sorry. It's not. It's you're applauding Councillor Hayden. Sorry, I thought it was a hand up.
And her stellar performance, Chair.
Oh, praise indeed, Helen. Praise indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, by minutes of the last meeting, we all agreed that they're a true record. Yep, I'll take silence as a yes. Are there any matters arising? No. Okay.
Can I? Sorry, I forgot to raise the hand. I just on item 47, matters arising from the previous minute about long-term funding of social care. For those people who perhaps haven't been able to get the answer, do we know what the reply was? Just for the public, maybe.
Rob, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Jenkins. Yes, there's been no reply as yet. I know under the minutes there was a request to publish the letter that was issued from Councillors Harland and Hayden. I was hoping a reply would come in to create that completeness, but there hasn't been one. So I can still publish that letter as a supplementary item to this agenda, should you want to, or should board members wish to. But I was just hoping for completeness that the response would come in. So I'll leave that to board members, I suppose.
Yes, I think we should get a response, really. It's I believe the government is going to produce some guidance in the next few weeks, maybe with the spending review. But it's disappointing we haven't had a response, because I think we sent the letter in certainly in October.
That's correct, Councillor Jenkins. I mean, with permission of Councillors Hayden and Hand, I could chase up formally as well. That's another option.
Helen?
Yeah, that's fine with me. Yeah.
And with me, that was going to be my suggestion anyway.
Yeah, so I'll look to draft that this week then. That's fine.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, are there any other matters arising? No? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 7 on Welcome to Yorkshire and the decision by Leeds to provide additional funding taken over the summer. As I mentioned at the start of the meeting, Welcome to Yorkshire is the official tourism agency for Yorkshire, and given the impact of the pandemic has had on tourism and the link that tourism has to the hospitality sector, it's clear that Welcome to Yorkshire can play a key role in supporting the recovery from COVID-19. Businesses need to get back on the feet, and Welcome to Yorkshire can play an important role in that. Since James has taken the time to join us today, I'd like to hand over to him first off to set out some of the renewed vision for Welcome to Yorkshire and help set the scene for board members. Following that, I'll open up the item for questions from members and comments from Councillors Lewis, Neil or Victoria. If board members wish to speak, please indicate in the usual way. Thank you. Okay, James, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Harland. How long would you give me to set the scene? 5-10 minutes?
Yep, 10 minutes is fine, yep.
Yeah, I'll go until 10:50 then, only because, as you can imagine, there's a lot to go through.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for inviting me on this morning. Do appreciate it. So I joined back in January of this year. The brief at the time was relatively, I won't say straightforward, but clear. The organisation had gone through a turbulent 18 months, notwithstanding the issues of Sir Gary Verity leaving the organisation, but then the subsequent, I would say, drift since then, or since that time. Financial affairs were played out in public, and so the organisation was one that all had achieved some great things in the past years, bringing the Tour de Yorkshire, the Tour de France back in 2014, participation in a number of festivals, and I suppose putting Yorkshire on the global map. It was a bruised animal, I think it was fair to say, that I picked up in January, but the brief was to rebuild bridges, to regain trust, to revitalise the brand, and play this out through the public sphere, an element of transparency, because the public sector had certainly come to the organisation's call when it was needed. And I would say that between January and March, we'd started to do that. My first role was to try and get my head under the bonnet of the car to understand the real problems that had caused the situation. I think at that time, back in January, we had around 45 staff and a wage bill of close to £1.82 million. So this was the first thing that we needed to wrestle control over, to make sure we had a real grip on the finances of Welcome to Yorkshire. Having worked at football clubs and both in the private and public sector before, it was important for me to really understand the outgoings and the incomings at Welcome to Yorkshire, and to see if we could afford all the staff, but also the other liabilities, fixed and flexible, such as the office that we occupy in Leeds city centre, and various other matters. We did this by starting a process of meeting with every local authority, chief executive and leader. That had started. It hasn't completed, unfortunately, because of COVID-19. What no one told me in the job description when I joined, that a global pandemic would be just around the corner, which would move me away from welcoming people to Yorkshire to actively saying on Look North one evening, please stay away. So we can't underestimate the challenge that COVID has added.
Join the meeting.
Sorry, has added to matters. But if we just work on between January and March, yes, the aim was to introduce a new strategy. As you mentioned at the outset, Councillor Harland, Welcome to Yorkshire is the marketing agency, the tourism agency, marketing agency for tourism within the county, but also to resonate that message of our beauty, of our heritage, of our history, of our culture, of our 4 distinct sub-regions, North, South, East and West Yorkshire, our 3 national parks, our coastline and vibrant towns and cities across the county, across the country and across the world. And as I say, Welcome to Yorkshire has done that to a certain degree of success over many years. However, I openly said in my strategy documents at the outset, I think we needed more of a regional focus. South and East Yorkshire could arguably say that they weren't represented, as well as North and West Yorkshire, in terms of member of numbers, in terms of the number of events that we put on across the county. So the new strategy was a Yorkshire for all, to demonstrate North, South, East and West, but also when we say all, I mean all people, from all ethnicities, all backgrounds, a real modern Yorkshire, a real understanding that our greatest strength as Yorkshire folk is our variety and our diversity. 5.5 million people live in the county, and I think that was our USP, to say that to anyone that was coming to visit, not only do we offer some of the most iconic buildings or landscapes in the world, such as the fabulous Peace Hall behind me, but also a place to live, work and study. And that's our strategy for 2021 going forward. And it was going to be for 2021, but as I said, COVID really put the handbrake on that back in March. So the idea of live, work and study brings a new dimension to what Welcome to Yorkshire will focus on going forward. Of course, we will extol the virtues of why you would visit Yorkshire for the reasons I mentioned, whether it's a city break in Leeds city centre, whether it's the cultural hotspots of Bradford and Huddersfield and Kirklees, or whether it is that coastal walk in Scarborough, Whitby or Filey, or perhaps it is, a ramble through the Yorkshire countryside to try and follow on the footsteps of James Herriot. But equally, pre-COVID, there were many heritage and arts and cultural destinations that we could offer alongside world-class food and drink. But the reason why we brought visit, live, work and study into the equation is prior to COVID, we were aware that the international student population that were coming into Yorkshire were actually a real economic driver for the future of the county. And if I can give you a quick example, every student that comes into Yorkshire normally comes with one of these, an iPhone. And if we think about a student coming from China or India or the Middle East or America, Northern Europe, or even Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle or London, they're coming for the first time. They will choose Leeds University or Sheffield Hallam or York as a reason to come and study because of the course. But actually they're coming to choose Yorkshire as a place to live for the next 3, 4, 5 years of their life. Students on average will spend a multiple of what they would spend on their tuition fees in the local area. And when they're not studying, and bear in mind, I studied back in 1999 and had 9 contact hours a week, it meant I had 40 plus hours to get to know the city that I was living in and then the surrounding area. So these become advocates of the county, and actually they're transmitting their messages and their pictures of them at the Peace Hall or the Yorkshire Coast or wherever back to their own networks via Facebook and Instagram. If we can then convince these students to then perhaps work in Yorkshire because it's a viable proposition, it has good career opportunities. Again, they are becoming tourists on their own doorstep, spending money, time in the local areas, the bars, clubs, the restaurants, the theatres, the outdoor attractions, the indoor attractions. If from here they can see that Yorkshire is a viable proposition to live and meet a partner and maybe build a family, the whole purpose, the whole circle of life starts again. And I think COVID has just accelerated our strategy to realise that whilst we can't attract international tourists and perhaps domestic tourists during a lockdown, we do have 5.5 million people to attract. One of our campaigns for 2021, we believe, is COVID proof. It's called Walkshire, where we're actually wanting Yorkshire to become the capital of walking across the world. Walking was one thing that you could do freely during lockdown. And in fact, is actively encouraged now, whether it's the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, whether it's around your local town or city, whether it's in an urban area or whether it's in a beautiful part of the countryside. Walking is clearly good for the soul. It's clearly good for our mental and physical well-being, but actually there's a big economic driver to it. Walkers spend money. Pre-COVID, you spend a Sunday afternoon planning where you're going to walk. And if, like myself and my wife with 2 kids, we're thinking about a glass of wine and a beer at the end of it or a hot chocolate for the kids, walkers do spend money. So that's a big part of our strategy going forward. But the Yorkshire for All element is very much about embracing the real modern diversity of the county, still aiming for the big picture. The Tour de Yorkshire, albeit postponed last week into 2022, has to be on our agenda going forward, but it has to be one of many big festivals, one of many big world-class events that Welcome to Yorkshire can actively help put on in collaboration with local authority partners and the private sector. The private sector has been decimated over the last 9 months, and our membership principally comes from either private sector businesses or public sector subscriptions. And we've worked really hard introducing a new strategic services element of what we do, whereby we're working with the likes of Visit Leeds, Visit Bradford, Visit Harrogate, Visit Calderdale, Visit Scarborough, Visit Sheffield. So we really understand what's happening on the doorsteps of these towns and cities across the county. Less about Welcome to Yorkshire and more about what's happening in the county. We don't necessarily want the headlines anymore, and I apologise if that's how it's been observed in the past few years. But actually, if Welcome to Yorkshire is going to be the amplifier of our good news, it should be really the residents and the people and the businesses of Yorkshire that steal the headlines, and that's our role going forward. TV tourism will be a big part of 2021 for us. Again, in the absence of being able to put big festivals and events on, the virtual world of falling in love with why people love all creatures great and small, or Gentleman Jack, or the Peaky Blinders, all of which have been filmed in the county, is very much something that we're going forward with. So that's a quick 10-minute introduction, Councillor Harland, but I'm happy to take questions. But that's the direction of travel for 2021, particularly with Yorkshire and our ecological understanding of what we can do, but also our long-term plan with Visit, Live, Work and Study.
Thank you, James. Really good. And I'm being one of those walkers, and yes, we do contribute to the
you certainly do
hospitality industry, shall we say?
Some more than others.
Are there any? Neil, Victoria, or James? Do you want to add anything at this stage, or?
Not me. No, Neil's just texted to say he's dropped out. He's got a connection problem. I don't know whether he's back.
Okay. No, it doesn't look like it. Nope.
No, I haven't got anything further to add.
Okay, any questions for James? If you can raise your hand. No?
Wow.
Sam. Sorry, I forgot that you'd messaged.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that introduction, James, and nice to speak to you as well. I just want to ask, could you give us, for the record, just a little bit of a view? You mentioned about speaking with the various different public authorities who obviously make the public sector contributions. Could you just give us a bit of analysis about the situation with regards to Wakefield and why Wakefield decided not to contribute towards Welcome to Yorkshire, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Just a bit of background then. So Welcome to Yorkshire, as I mentioned, is both privately and publicly sector funded, principally for the public sector to demonstrate Yorkshire as a whole and to market the constituent parts of the county. This is paid via subscriptions every year. So each individual local authority would pay a subscription, and then the private sector would pay by individual membership. At the start of the year and for the past couple of years, Welcome to Yorkshire has received in and around £1 million worth of funding from the business rates pool as well, which has gone towards supporting many of our projects. But when COVID struck back in March, it was clear that both the private and the public sector via austerity would struggle to probably contribute the similar level of funds in the past. So subscriptions on one side are an annual fee paid by each local authority to support the bigger picture of Welcome to Yorkshire, promoting Yorkshire, and then individual parts within that. And then the recent request was a grant aid funding to support our other projects. The decision of Wakefield, and I think the decision of every local authority in the county, was based on needs and must at a time when public health is clearly higher on the agenda than perhaps tourism or the visitor economy. I don't know the ins and outs of Wakefield's particular decision, and I suppose that's for them to answer rather than me. But at the same time, our argument would be that Welcome to Yorkshire and the Yorkshire visitor economy underpins much of the rest of the economy. So it's quite symbiotic that pubs, restaurants, tea rooms, fish and chip shops, visitor attractions, albeit firsthand may not be seen as part of the visitor economy or the tourism industry, actually are. But in terms of why they chose not to particularly fund Welcome to Yorkshire, if I'm honest, Sam, I can't answer that, but I suppose that's for the decision makers in Wakefield in particular.
Thank you, James. I've got Councillor McKenna and Councillor Robinson. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. James, obviously, as you said, the handbrake is firmly on because of COVID, and none of us could have forecast a year rolling out like a house in January. So, but from what we're hearing about vaccines, it's unlikely that we're going to be back to any way approaching normal till next winter and late summer. I just wonder, what's your plans to carry on in that time, and what do you think you can do? I recognise the value of Welcome to Yorkshire. It was the proudest day of my life when the Grand Depart left Leeds, and we had a tour here. Fantastic, marvellous what's been happening with the tour of Yorkshire as well. But it's very unlikely that we'll be able to arrange some big events like that in the next probably 18 months. But you've got to keep going, and you've got to support tourism as best you can when it starts easing down. And I just wondered what your plans was. I mean, you mentioned a lot about walking. I've done many a walk with the Chair, Mary, and some former colleagues. But you really don't need that much money to spend for a walk. You know, you get in your car and you go and you do the Light Wake or Pennygent or whatever, you know, and you perhaps have a bit of lunch there. But, you know, it happens anyway. You don't need encouragement if you're a walker. You go find these beautiful walks and you participate in. It's a wonderful day out, and that will continue even during lockdown, as you say. But I just wondered, what's your plans for the next year, you know, for certainly the next 6 months anyway, 9 months. Thank you, James. And keep doing what you do, mate.
Oh, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I think you've raised some key points there, but some key words, and I think support is one of them. As a former business owner myself, when the chips are down, when you're looking out of the window and thinking where the next sale is going to come from, or the next opportunity, especially in hospitality, you know, it's very easy to beat yourself up and maybe cash in your chips and think about another alternative. But I think this is where Welcome to Yorkshire over the last 6 months has really demonstrated its own pivot. And I hate to use that word, but it seems to be the buzzword. Welcome to Yorkshire, as you mentioned, was a celebratory organisation responsible for putting on the Grand Depart and many big other events. Think about some of the events that we take part in, the Great Yorkshire Show, hundreds and thousands of micro events across the county as well that perhaps you might not be aware of, but we're supporting food and drink, arts, literature, heritage. So you're right. Over the next 6 to 9 months, I think it's going to be difficult to forecast the events that we can put on. What we are doing at the moment is holding regular webinars. We've got our White Rose Awards event in 2 weeks' time, where we celebrate the whole county, admittedly looking back. But I think a recalibration of what we do. So we've lobbied harder than we've ever lobbied before. So at the start of lockdown, when many micro businesses such as bed and breakfast owners that were paying council tax as opposed to business rates, we really lobbied hard with our local MPs all across the Yorkshire and the Humber area to really fight for them and really demonstrate the importance of these businesses to the bigger economy. So lobbying is something that we will do. And when I say lobbying, I don't want us to be political here. I just want us to amplify the messages and the actual idiosyncrasies and the issues of the county. Think about the flooding that happened this time last year that's probably going to happen again. That affects tourism massively. You mentioned that walkers don't spend much money and it happens. Well, actually, not everyone does walk. It's the most accessible thing that you can do as an individual. Unlike cycling, and I'm a big cycling fan, by the way, there is no ability needed. There is no equipment needed. So in terms of inclusivity, it's the perfect model. And what we're trying to do with this, James, is not necessarily, reinvent the wheel, but we do want people to rethink about what they do in terms of when and how they walk. So walking and Welcome to Yorkshire is 2 or 3-fold. Yes, it's about exploring the great outdoors on our doorstep that we perhaps didn't know. So I'm sure, Mr. McKenna, there are ginnels and snickets that you didn't know around your neck of the woods over the last 6 months, because we've all found them. Me and my children didn't realise the River Wharf was so close to us, and yet we've had a wonderful walk in the last few weeks, seeing herons and seeing some real natural habitat, but also stopping at coffee shops and maybe stopping to get the kids a packet of sweets, and then when pubs were open, stopping for a drink. So our message has to be, when people are out walking, to support local, to actually maybe think about taking the sandwiches with them and maybe a little bit of a Mars bar, but where possible, stopping and supporting local economies. But it's not just Pen-y-ghent, it's not just Ingleton, it is walking around Leeds city centre. It's perhaps walking to the train and not maybe using the car as much. So using Welcome to Yorkshire as that vehicle to really get the bigger messages across of tackling obesity, tackling mindfulness and inclusivity, but actually supporting businesses through the next 6 months that will need them most. So if you're a restaurant, we're going to do a poll later today saying 3 things. Are you opening on the 2nd December? Or should I say, are you planning to open? Are you doing any marketing activity, or are you a rabbit in the headlights just caught thinking, do I employ more staff? Do I think about any Christmas marketing, or do I just write it off? And I think with this intelligence, we can probably relay that back to the likes of Leeds City Council or Bradford or Sheffield or wherever and say, this is what the industry is thinking. This is what businesses are worried about, concerned about. And this is where I think Welcome to Yorkshire can offer a real support function. In the past, yes, very much celebratory, but I think going forward, we will be that organisation of thought leadership and getting them through the difficult times, pivoting, maybe setting up online trade. So back in March, we were working with lots of brewers, happens to be a little passion of mine, that weren't selling beer online. So all of a sudden, when lockdown came, they went, how can we get through this? And the likes of Ilkley Brewery, Northern Monk, Little Valley in Halifax have had record 6 months because they've pivoted and started selling online. And again, I think people need to understand that the tourism industry isn't just front facing. It's not just Castle Howard, Harewood House, the Peace Hall. It's the delivery drivers, it's the packers, it's the producers behind that. So there's lots to do, James. We're busier than ever. We're just doing it differently, I would say.
Thank you for that. Very comprehensive answer there. Do you want to come back, Jim, or are you happy with that?
No, that's fine. Mary James just mentioned my favourite beer at the moment, Ilkley Brewery and Mary Jane. Wonderful drink.
James, I've spent a lot of time with Mary Jane over the last 6 months. My wife will testify. It's the only other lady I'm allowed to spend time with.
James Mason, this is a man that's got a renowned wine cellar as well, I might add.
That is very true.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, James, for making yourself available today and coming in. It's much appreciated. And having met James, I can attest that he has brought a new leadership, a new focus and a new direction to Welcome to Yorkshire, and one that was very welcome as well. I think that the report today is split into 2 parts. There's the Welcome to Yorkshire part, and then there's the council processes for decision-making part. And if I focus on the Welcome to Yorkshire part first, It's incredibly welcome what James has suggested, that what they're trying to do about the supply chain, talk about that for tourism in West Yorkshire and the whole of Yorkshire. Also, I know that they're involved in initiatives such as tree planting as well. They're taking the climate change, the climate emergency very seriously and looking at climate change. And I think that's really welcome. The public sector and all of our partners need to speak with one voice on that. I guess before turning to the officers, there's two questions for James. One of them is the grant that was made available was on the basis of an SLA, being a service level agreement being put in place. I don't think that's in place at the moment, so an update on that would be useful. And the second question would be around shared office space. Obviously, that can be a huge cost. We know that people are working differently now. Is this council or other councils having conversations about shared office space with you, so you don't have to use that space? You can work more closely with officers to marry up our economic development projects.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. So I'll take the two questions, if I may. So starting with the SLA and then the office space. You're right. When I joined again back in January, and I mentioned to Councillor Harland that I wanted a year to try and unpick or understand the workings of Welcome to Yorkshire. The subscription fees were something that was surrounded with a little bit of mystery, and when I say that in terms of the amounts and the figures, etc., but it was clear once I'd spent a bit of time, they were based on size of population, size of need, size of offer. There are parts of Yorkshire that have a real strong tourism offer, other parts perhaps less so, hence why our visit, live, work and study brings in all elements. So parts of South Yorkshire may be really strong on industry and economic impact, etc. And then North Yorkshire, obviously we've got the Yorkshire Dales, the North York Moors National Park. So what we wanted to do with the SLA was to offer real demonstrable value to each local authority and the national parks, because we count those in this instance as local authority partners. And as a business owner myself, as a decision and a leader yourself, you want to know what bang you're getting for your buck. So the SLAs were broken down and ongoing. We're almost there, I think, with Leeds City Council and a few others. We just need to probably dot the I's and cross the T's, and it's been very much a two-way process. I'm pleased to say that we're very close to signing that, and it's based on understanding value. It's based on understanding what Leeds City Centre and the City Region will get from Welcome to Yorkshire. And we've really built up an inventory, Councillor Robinson, whereby in the past it was very much a goodwill gesture, and there were some metrics in there, some KPIs. We now have everything detailed, from the price of a tweet or a social media post through to a newsletter, through to webinars, through to particular events in the future that we'll work on together. So the SLA, depending on the size of contract, will be determined by what you will receive back in return. So it's almost algebraic. It's X plus Y equals Z, depending on how much you pay in that respect. And therefore, I think it gives Leeds City Council, I think it gives any decision maker, both on either side of the coin, to able to track the progress. So in 2 or 3 months, my counterparts and my colleagues, who have an area manager specifically for Leeds, will be able to say, you appeared in this many number of searches, this many articles in our Y magazine or in our webinars or on our website, etc., or even the Yorkshire Evening Post, the Yorkshire Post, Look North. This is how often you've appeared. And this is the demonstrable clicks back to the website that we can say, do you know what, we've had 1,000 clicks on this particular item. It might be Leeds City art galleries, it may be museums. And then with that, we can probably share some data, which I think going forward will be really important for any decision maker, that some of the natural data that we receive with our 12 million unique visitors, we can actually help you make better informed decisions on transport, on travel, on ecology, and so on and so forth. So does that answer the question on the first one?
Sorry, I was muted there. I think it goes some way to doing that. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is about bang for the buck, and people knowing what they're getting out the other side of this, and that there are no, if you'll forgive me for the phrase, there are no blank checks that are written. There is something that's coming back here.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fair point. I mean, I wouldn't comment on the past, but I don't think it was as laissez-faire perhaps as has been reported elsewhere. But I think you're right in that there has to be some real transparency to what the contract looks like going forward, so that if I was to leave, or any of my colleagues, you pick up the new Welcome to Yorkshire manual and say, right, that's what you get for £10,000 or £20,000 or £50,000. And the beauty about that, Councillor Robinson, is it enables me to upspend or upsell, should I say, going forward. So if we're doing something particularly well, it might be on the climate, it might be on arts, heritage, culture, it might be something that's specific to the Leeds City region or Leeds City Council. We can then perhaps suggest we do a little bit more. So there are projects that we're ongoing now with other areas of the country, marketing projects, particular professional services, whether it's web design, video editing, social media marketing, that we can, demonstrate real value both ways. So Welcome to Yorkshire needs to be something that can be embraced and shared by others and not just be a one-way process. And I think that's the proudest thing that we've achieved in the first 9 to 10 months, is that two-way process of saying, that's what you're paying, that's what you're getting. And it gives me the wry smile to say, if we overperform, maybe we can ask to spend more in the future, whoever that might be with. Okay, thank you. So, and the second point on office space, I mentioned at the outset in my opening comments that we do have some high fixed costs. One initially was wages. So we've reduced 45 staff down to around 22, which any rationalisation of any organisation takes time, and it's a difficult restructure. But the output in a digital world, I'm pleased to say, has been as high, if not higher, than it's ever been. We haven't been able to put any events on apart from one, which was golf. And I know that you have a penchant for golf, don't you? So we're demonstrating our breadth of variety. So we put a COVID-safe golf event on, which actually made money. It turned a profit, which again is another KPI. We won't be putting necessarily events on just for civic pride, which are important, but we'll be putting them on to try and return on investment. But the other fixed cost, as I mentioned, other than staff wages, was the building at Round Foundry in Leeds City Centre. Previously, we were in York City Centre. Now we're in Leeds. Again, that has its upsides and downsides when you're trying to represent the whole of Yorkshire. A big building, easily, comfortably fit 40 to 50 people in. Now down to 22, you could argue we're rattling around, but we're not now because of COVID, because they have to go meter spacings within each desk. We've got the glass screens up, so we've had to, like many businesses, invest in the infrastructure of the building and make it COVID safe. But I would welcome conversations with any local authority partners. Some have been had, I must admit, albeit tentatively back in April and May, about shared office space, whether to house a charity or local government department. That's something we'd definitely welcome, Councillor Robinson, because I think being in the city centre is useful for us. But at the same time, the only reason why we probably haven't been able to look at other alternatives is due to a financial commitment under the contract. So we need to unpick that, but it's something we will look to do in every opportunity to save money where we can and to make money or exhaust opportunities as well.
Are you okay with that, Matthew?
I am. Is it okay to ask questions of the officers, Chair, as well?
Yep.
Just on James's golf point before I go as well. James knows my my ambition to. It's a century since we've had the Ryder Cup, which was the first Ryder Cup staged in Europe, and it was staged in the north of England here in Yorkshire. The ambition to bring the Ryder Cup back to the north of England and back to Yorkshire, which and given that we know the money that's involved in the golf industry, it's big bucks. It's big bucks for tourism. It's big bucks for the supply chain. It's big bucks for everybody involved. I'm also pleased that he's using the live, work, study line, because I've used on my leaflets making the Harewood Ward the best place to live, work and grow up since 2010. So hopefully he's stolen that from my leaflets in the past.
Pinch with pride.
Looking to the officers, the report talks about a joint committee. It would be useful to know who is on the joint committee and how organisations can apply for funding from that joint committee, because it isn't clear from the report. It isn't clear what the application process is, and it isn't clear what the accountability process is.
Okay, thank you. Neil, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I've had it. Sorry, I've missed the last 20 minutes. My internet cut out, so apologies. So the joint committee that's referred to, Councillor Robinson, was the joint committee which oversaw the business rates pool. And that was made up of the leaders of the business rates pool, which combined West and North Yorkshire. And those meetings were public meetings, and agendas and minutes and so forth are kind of set out, where they decided how that pool would be allocated. The issue for us this year has been that because that there isn't a business rates pool. So that ceased to exist on at the end of March, and therefore that's why the decision about the allocation of money this year was actually taken through a delegated decision by officers to allocate the money to Welcome to Yorkshire. So it was so as I say, the pool was in existence last year. That was all done in through that joint committee. This year there was money left over from that pool, but no new pool, and the allocation was made from the surplus resource. So the council had about 0.5 million, I think it's 0.52 million, and we allocated 0.18 million of that to Welcome to Yorkshire this year.
Matthew?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate Neil's comments on this and that we don't have a joint committee at the moment. I think part of the challenge is that when Wakefield have taken this to the equivalent of their executive board, and I do appreciate the time imperatives that were involved in this as well, and around the demands and the sums of money, there is a risk that funding in this way can look sketchy and looking like it's lacking transparency, that it's not in the public domain. I appreciate it's gone through the delegated decision process that is available to officers, but given the nature of this and that discretionary grants weren't available to some small businesses at the time, I'm sure that the officers can understand it's been difficult for some to swallow and understand the process that's involved and how they can apply for grants in this way.
If I can come back in on that, Councillor Harland. So we did. You've mentioned, Councillor Robinson, the issue of timing, and it was an issue of timing. So I think I did make it clear in the July Scrutiny Board in a public meeting that it was our intention to make this decision, and then subsequently the leader and the leaders of the opposition were informed of the fact that Martin was going to make that decision. Martin Farrington was going to make that decision as the director. So we did it in as public a way as possible. I mean, I think if the timing had been different, it could have gone to the executive board, and I agree in some senses with you, Councillor Robinson, that would have been a more satisfactory process in terms of the way that's perceived by the public. But as I said, there was no intention there to kind of obscure things in any way. But I did make it clear that we would make that decision, and all the proper processes were followed.
Oh, sorry, Matthew, are you satisfied with that response?
I think it's maybe a difference of opinion of how things work sometimes, and the processes that we go through. I do appreciate the timescales that are involved. I know on the 22nd, when we had our meeting, we were told there was an intent, but no decision had been made. By the 23rd, the next day, the delegated decision was published. Things were running very, very quickly, and I can appreciate that difficulty for officers as well. I wonder, Chair, if it's maybe worth looking at this in a year's time and coming back to have a discussion with James from Welcome to Yorkshire, and we can look at what the SLA looks like and how it's progressed in that time, and maybe that's an appropriate route for a transparency function, if that's suitable to James and to officers.
Yeah, I think Rob and I had discussed bringing this back for an update at some stage, and I think you're right to give it, bearing in mind all the circumstances that we are going through, to give it 12 months to bed in. Hopefully things will start moving along at a pace later on in the year, who knows, but yeah, happy for that. Thanks for that, Matthew. Councillor Jenkins.
Hi, my first thought was maybe a tagline could be "Welcome to Yorkshire." Still, going back to the governance review, it mentions in the papers 324 that I know the organisation's been going through a traumatic time in a way because of the history, in a sense, and COVID-19 has not helped at all. But so it mentions about a governance review and a report on the 12th of November And after this time, more information will be available. So I'm just concerned about due diligence, accountability, the presentation of the accounts of the organisation, whether you've got a secretary now for the trustee board, whether Leeds could have any representation on the board alongside North Yorkshire and Doncaster. And thirdly, the West Yorkshire Charitable Trust, although it's not a public body or publicly funded, it has got the same address as the Welcome to Yorkshire, and it did have £190,000 in its accounts, and now reduced to about 57,000, but seems to have almost gone dormant. But it is a trust that's available to support tourism, allegedly or possibly. And I just wondered if you could comment on that. Thank you.
James?
Yeah, do you want me to take those, Councillor Harland? I think it's only right and proper. Yes, so in terms of the governance report, Councillor Jenkins, is it Jenkinson or Jenkins? Sorry, Jenkins, apologies, my screen's a bit shorter. Yes, we did have a board strategic day last, I think it was Thursday or Friday, where we've addressed elements of governance. So we have currently 12 board members, open to the public as to who they are, chaired by former Councillor Peter Box. It is something we take very seriously, because I think when you receive any amount of public money, whether it's £1 or £1 million, I think you should be overtly transparent, and I'll come on to the accounts as well. In terms of the governance review, we do want a board that represents the whole of the county. Difficult to have public sector members from all constituents, because we're limited to 12, and of course it is important to have a strong private sector element of that as well. We do have people that live and come from within Leeds, but perhaps they don't have the level of scrutiny that a public servant would have. But we will be publishing the details going forward of any changes that have been made. In terms of governance, we have sought external consultancy on that to make sure that our articles of association and we're adhering to everything that as we should be as a private company limited by guarantee. In terms of the accounts, I think that's a fair point. And if I may just bring you up to speed on that. Again, when I joined back in January to harbour the point, I did want to really get my feet under the table before we really understood what had happened in the past. So if I just take you back a little bit, the year to March the 19th, we should have signed off the accounts by December 19. I joined in January 2020. So again, it took me quite a long time to really get to grips with what had happened in the past. And I think it was fair to say that Welcome to Yorkshire couldn't really demonstrate it had a viable funding model, hence why the need for public sector involvement, and of course the £500,000 loan from North Yorkshire County Council. So historically, we were in a position whereby a decision was made by a committee prior to me that Welcome to Yorkshire was a going concern, but the financial model just wasn't sustainable, whether it was private sector income, public sector income. The outgoings were higher than the incomings. So the accounting period was extended to September 19, so that this could be assessed and the accounts could be signed off as a going concern, September 20. Covid then hit, and the £1 million business rates pool money wasn't available, as we mentioned. This only increased the uncertainty, Councillor Jenkins. But what we have done is now resize the business from 45 to 22. We've prepared quite a robust business plan, which has been shared with all local authority leaders and chief executives that have asked for it, to demonstrate how we will trade out of this, and a pathway for sustainability. Councillor Robinson mentioned tree planting. Yes, that's part of our ongoing sustainability project, but we've launched a web shop, we've launched a new membership model. We're looking at ways we can actually use the wealth and power of the brand name to actually bring in commerce. That will challenge a few people, because naturally, whilst we're focusing on our own bank balance to some extent, our own economics, how we then able to support the industry with the civic pride element of it. It's a challenge, but we're doing it successfully. But we were asked specifically to no longer rely on public sector funding. So to bring you up to date, the audit of the accounts for the last 18 months to September 19 and the 6 months to March the 20 has commenced in the last few days, and we expect to file before the end of the year. What that will do then is give a true picture of what we've done over the last year in terms of cost cutting, in terms of income generation, and it saves us one audit fee, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to demonstrate the best use of public funds. Had we have done it way back when, I think all it would have done is tell us what we already knew. Whereas I think revealing the full accounts for the last 18 months at the turn of the year, I think it will show a demonstration of upward trajectory, flatlining in other areas, cost saving certainly in terms of huge outgoing in terms of staffing numbers. But I think it will give a true picture and maybe a level of comfort that we now have a grip on things and better governance as well. So we've got a scrutiny, this is a scrutiny committee. We've got an audit committee that will meet every month now. So they will meet prior to the board meeting to ensure that we're on the right track and making sure that what I'm doing isn't necessarily either, reckless is the wrong word, but doing things without proper approval or with an understanding of the business model going forward. Do you want to come back on that before I just answer on the Charitable Trust?
Is that all right, Councillor Jenkins?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, so Welcome to Yorkshire does have a charitable trust, and I think it is called the Welcome to Yorkshire Charitable Trust. Very imaginative. And that has principally been quite a low-key organisation. I don't know the full ins and outs, although I've been recently appointed to the board. Although the chair, Lord Howard, David Lascelles, is recently moving on from that. So we need a slight governance review in terms of refreshing the board. But principally, I think it has been a vehicle whereby philanthropic donations or other charitable monies has come in, and the board members have been able to use that money, as you mentioned, for the promotion of tourism, but specifically community-led projects. So I don't know the ins and outs of the finances. You are right to say that at the last accountancy period, I think the balance was around £50,000 to £60,000. I can't therefore comment on previous years, but I'm sure we can investigate that. I do know that the current board incumbents again want us to use that money to really amplify and project local community projects that involve the tourism industry. So, for example, we pitched for 2 elements of funding for a campaign called A Song for Yorkshire, which was to celebrate Yorkshire through the medium of song, specifically through lockdown where people were at home a lot. School communities were sort of separated. So we were trying to use the idea of celebrating whether you live in Barnsley or Doncaster or Scarborough or Leeds or Bradford to actually demonstrate why your community is so important to you. They liked that and wanted to support that. And then in addition, as Councillor Robinson mentioned, our new membership scheme, which is where we're planting trees for every member that signs up for, I think, £20 or £25, can be bought by people all across the world. So the diaspora of Yorkshire, being 30 to 40, 50 million people across the world, is another project that they're invested in. But again, nothing leaves that account without the trustees signing that off. We have one trustee on our board, Dan Bates, in South Yorkshire. So again, trying to demonstrate our want and desire to be transparent and properly governed.
Thank you, James. Councillor Almas.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Because I've had problems with my audio. Thank you. Mine is more of a comment, very comprehensively. Thank you, James. Very comprehensively explained. I think we're really, sort of impressed with the work that you're doing under the circumstances. And please pass on our gratitude to your team as well. I think you're doing a wonderful job. My question is around, under the circumstances that we're in, very difficult circumstances, the only way that people can kind of, have some sort of interaction with regards to Welcome to Yorkshire and all that is generally online under the circumstances. Yeah. And I've been really impressed by some of the work that you've been doing, for example, Yorkshire Days in campaign, where you've offered really good, activities, indoor activities and whatever. So really good. And purchasing vouchers and all that. My question is, what sort of hits are we getting in terms of, these websites? And secondly, how are we going to, because, it's becoming more of a lifestyle for some families to stay in and whatever. So you know, before it really becomes a lifestyle and we learn to live with it, what are we doing to encourage people to actually come out through that medium as well? Because people are really reliant, you know, online. So if you could, I'm not expecting figures straight away, but if you could provide us with some of those facts and figures, that would be really useful. Thank you.
No, I'm happy to give you as much information, Councillor Almas, as I can, and thank you for your question or questions. Yes, I think back in March, we realised that we had to completely transform the business overnight, as many businesses do. You know, we'd had, I think, 100 festivals or events planned for 2020, and imagine how excited I was to be at my first Tour de Yorkshire or Great Yorkshire Show, the Harrogate Flower Show, or you name it. That wasn't possible. So like the rest of the world, we had to continue with a virtual offering to use the medium of our website, our email databases, our social media platforms to still try and ask people to be as imaginative. It was Dream Now, Discover Later, which was our big theme back in March and April. So, for example, we set up a World Cup of Yorkshire via social media, where we were asking people to vote for the most iconic building in Yorkshire. So I'm here behind the Peace Hall in Halifax, but it could have been York Minster, it could have been Leeds Town Hall, it could have been the Deep, a really modern aquarium in Hull. And we were actually asking people and challenging them to say, if you haven't been to any of these areas, make sure you do in the future, because if you don't, they won't be there anymore. You know, they rely on subscriptions, they rely on people spending in the gift shops, they rely on people spending on tickets or annual subscriptions. So we did that very successfully, to answer your point, and we saw our web traffic grow by 91% in the summer. And interestingly, excitingly, these were people that had never been to the website before. So these were people from Liverpool and Manchester or Cornwall or Dorset that couldn't fly off to Spain or Italy or wherever. They had to come. They had to go on holiday somewhere in the UK. And we really worked hard to get them to come to Yorkshire, because we said, whoa, Yorkshire's got a coastline. The weather might not be great, but you can still paddle in the sea. And actually in May and June, it was very good. We've also got lots to do in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, food, drink, heritage, culture, really vibrant, diverse ethnicities and festivals. The Caribbean festival that goes on in Huddersfield and, of course, Leeds every year. But you're right. What we don't want is people to just become sedentary and think, well, I can access all this from my living room. So one of the campaigns we mentioned earlier was Walkshire. So we want people to really get out and really embrace what's on their doorstep. Cycling, angling, nature trails. We're working with the Canals and River Trust. We're working with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. We're working with the Yorkshire Wildlife Park to really get families to really get out and see what's on the doorstep, because we probably have taken it for granted in the past. We've not needed to get out and walk. We can jump on a car, we can jump on a plane and fly around. So what we're wanting to do is escape the everyday. That's another big buzzword that we're using with Visit Britain, whereby we're getting people to, where possible, not just accept that they have beauty on their doorstep, but go and see it. With Leeds City Centre in particular, during Black History Month, we're hoping to partner up with a guy called Joe Lewis, who does heritage trails around Leeds City Centre, but really explaining the real underpinning of the multicultural city that Leeds is, to demonstrate to me as a white man at 42, how Leeds has been shaped over the last, 50, 60, 70 years. So we definitely want people out there, Councillor Almas, but in the COVID world, where we're not able to, get inside museums and theatre attractions, we're doing it virtually, whetting the appetite for when we can do that again, hopefully in early December. In terms of website hits, by the way, so 12 million unique visitors to yorkshire.com a year. And I think that's something that we can offer back to our local authorities and say, what we haven't done, Councillor Almas, very well in the past is probably understand our audience. What I mean by that is we broadcast a newsletter, and that might be, this is what you can do at the weekend. What we now do is, this is what you can do at the weekend if you're a single man or a woman, or a young couple, or a couple with children, or an empty nester with a bit of money to spend. This is what you can do if you need access issues. So accessible tourism is a big part of what we can do, where you can go with a wheelchair or anywhere, or with children. And I think this is something, again, going back to Councillor Robinson's point about an SLA, I think we can offer real intelligence via data and via insight to help us change our thought process in terms of what we do. So social media, whilst we have about 500,000 followers on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, I'm a little bit disappointed by that. I want that to be 1 million in the next few years. And I think we should really, really set some ambitious targets going forward. And I'm happy to answer any more questions you've got, Councillor Almas, on that.
Are you okay with that, Goha? Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised. Neil, James and Victoria, do you want to add anything at this stage? Or we're happy with? Happy? So just one from me, James, are you confident then now that Welcome to Yorkshire is well positioned from a governance position to move forward with the plans that you've set out?
I'm comfortable, Councillor Harland, with the trajectory, yes. I think we've got a commitment from all board members to be more transparent. Public board meetings will be held in public going forward where possible. We don't want to, it's quite a comfortable position for me that we've nothing to hide. First of all, we had absolutely nothing to hide because we had nothing, if that makes sense. We were behind the 8 ball, so we didn't have really anything to hide. And being a Bradfordian, having worked at my own football club, I had friends and family that said, James, who are we signing next week? Who are we playing, etc. So same with Welcome to Yorkshire. I do see we're a big football club. We all want the same thing. Despite party political persuasions, whether you're the chief executive of Leeds City Council, Sheffield, or you're the leader of Bradford, or you're the chief exec of Bradford City, got my words wrong there. Welcome to Yorkshire. We all want the same thing. So the governance is important. I don't want to be in this position in a year's time saying that I pulled the wool over anyone's eyes or misled anyone. That's not my interest. I do want us to be able to sing from the same hymn sheet as everyone that's got the same interest as Welcome to Yorkshire. I do want us to be able to use public funds to maximise and amplify the stories within the county, and in particular Leeds. But I also want us to be able to stand on our own 2 feet with a lot of the commercial income that hopefully we can derive. I think COVID-19 will make it really difficult, but I think now more than ever there's a need for a Welcome to Yorkshire. I really believe that, to be that thought leadership organisation. But in terms of governance, I'm comfortable that we are definitely on the right tracks. There's a commitment there. And time will tell, but yes, I am confident.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you for the comments from the board, and thanks again, James, for attending. It's really we really appreciate it with the circumstances.
Yeah,
and it's really positive to hear the views from outside the council. So we really appreciate the time you took coming along, and I look forward to seeing the work that you're planning deliver real benefits across Leeds and across wider Yorkshire. Good luck with your venture, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor, I'll leave now then, and I'm just going to go see my mum so you can explain what I mean. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
It's due to take his mum into a nursing home today. I think that's what he meant by we can explain it. But he took time out to come and speak to us because he knew how important we thought it was. So I think we should probably write to him, Rob, and say, just because of the circumstances, thank you for attending.
Yes, Chair, I'll do that. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. Right, we move now on to agenda item 8, which provides details on how COVID-19 has impacted council tax and business rates collection in Leeds. This is in response to board members' interest, and as we all know, both business and residents have been significantly impacted by the pandemic, affecting income and livelihoods and ability to pay the bills in the normal way. Business in particular, as well as their staff, have been in a very difficult position over the last 9 months, trying to understand changing restrictions and become COVID secure, whilst also continue to operate as effectively as possible. So Victoria, can I hand over to you for an introduction, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments, again in the normal way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think the main purpose of the report was to give an update on the collection rates, as you've said, for 2021, both for business rates and council tax. Business rates has fared slightly worse, but as you can understand, that's because of the climate that they're currently operating in. And that shows in the report that it's actually 5.19% behind where we'd have expected to have been this time last year. And that equates to around 16.7 million. And that is after all the relief that central government have provided to local businesses through business rates. Appendix 1 does show the collection rates and the impact that's had, and Appendix 2 does show the collection fund and how it operates. The deficit for this year is forecast to be 43.9 million, and government announced in the summer that could be spread over 3 years to impacts on each of the budget gaps for 21-22, 22-23, and finally the financial year 23-24, and it's around 14.6 million based on the current forecasts. However, we are expecting an announcement as part of the comprehensive spending review if there would be any government support around the losses of income that all authorities are experiencing through council tax and business rates. So I think that's all I wanted to say at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Anybody got any questions to that? Matthew.
Wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask a question, would I? Does that gap include the council tax increase both this year and in subsequent years, and assume that we are collecting the full amount? And a second question, Victoria, is it possible to get a ward breakdown of the council tax? So how much council tax is projected to be raised and where we are progressing with that? I'm assuming business rates is possible too, but that might be slightly more difficult in the circumstances.
I'll have to come back to you about the analysis by ward, because I'll just have to make some inquiries. I wouldn't like to promise something if I can't deliver it, so I'll go and check that out first before I come back to you, Councillor Robinson, on that. On the council tax increase, it does assume the increases that we've projected for this year. So when we set the council tax for 2021, we did have an increase of 2.99, and that was agreed, and that has been assumed in those figures. Obviously, for next year, we've re-looked at the council tax base and also the business rates base, and that will be provided to Executive Board in December, but they are projecting reduced amounts, as you can imagine, off the forecasts. Thank you.
Matthew?
Thanks, Chair. That'd be useful. I guess I'm mindful that where there's council tax rises, and I know the precarious situation of council's finances, but that bill has to fall on many residents who will be struggling with their finances at the moment, and it will maybe the difference between paying for the council tax or paying for something else. The other question I wanted to ask is just to find out a little bit more about the breakdown, the 8.9 million that was given to the council for the hardship fund, and how that was being allocated, if that was possible, Chair.
So the 8.9 million that was provided for the hardship funds being allocated to people who were on the local council tax support scheme. So they were provided with a payment of £150 per claimant, and then any new claimants that come through, they're also provided with an element of that hardship fund. So that's how it's being allocated. It is through the council tax support scheme. Thank you.
Matthew?
Perfect. Thanks, Chair. That's useful, and I'm sure it's very welcome by many people who are in receipt of that at the moment as well.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands raised. Are there no more questions for Victoria on this one? Neil or James, would you like to add anything? Okay.
They're getting off light today, Chair.
I know. Well, you see, they'd have been in Christmas mood if they'd have been stuffed with mince pies and things like that, Matthew, if we were into the Civic Hall, wouldn't they? So, okay. Well, okay. Thanks for those comments. Given the interest from board members, it's in an item we'll look to bring back in either February or March to get an update position. Before we move to the end of the financial year. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda 9, which looks to understand how the council has successfully adopted the new ways of working. Excuse me. Brought about by COVID-19, obviously. As the report points out, some 8,000 staff quickly moved to home working arrangements, whereas previously on average there would have been around 800. Quite an achievement and a testament to the efforts of officers and all involved, not least our staff and senior officers and the council leadership in keeping many services operational during the pandemic. Of course, we have to make sure that staff remain happy and able to do the job, which is why we have a section of staff wellbeing and the report. And it also looks at estate rationalisation and what the future might hold in terms of longer term change as a result of how we have worked since March. This is a significant item, and members may wish to seek more information from officers on this as we look to develop this into an inquiry. I'll take board members' guidance on that, but to start things off, I'll hand over to Mark and Graham, please to introduce themselves.
Hi, Councillor Harland. It's Graham here, Graham Sefton from the HR team. Mark, do you just want to say a quick hello?
Hi there, morning everyone. My name's Mark Mills, Head of Asset Management.
And I'll do a quick introduction and then we can lead into questions and any comments that colleagues have. So as you said, Councillor Harland, Scrutiny were particularly keen to hear how COVID has impacted on the ways of working across the council, particularly homework and wellbeing and that use of office accommodation. And yes, it's fair to say a lot has changed over the last 6 months, and we've responded really well. The report that you've got today was produced jointly by Mark and myself between HR and the asset management team, and it sets out how we supported those 8,000 staff to work from home. And for most, the good news is that it's broadly been a positive experience. And in the report, you'll see, largely based on some really good survey work that we've done in close contact with our colleagues over those 6 months, what their experience of working from home has been like, how we've supported their well-being, and not just well-being in terms of people that are at home, but also well-being of people who've needed to work in the workplace. And over that last 6 months, I think that's important to remember that we have successfully enabled people who can't work from home to be safely accommodated in the workplace. Looking ahead, in terms of some of our future plans around homework, and the report also sets out staff's attitude towards longer term homework, and it's interesting to see that there's a real positive appetite for this amongst staff, with over half of council staff saying that they're keen to work from home on an ongoing basis for half the time, for most of the time, and 80% of Leeds City Council staff say that they're happy to work from home for more than half their working week. Obviously, what we need to do going forward is strike the right balance between the appetite that seems to be there from staff alongside service delivery and organisational needs. And I guess going forward, that our aim is to get the best of both worlds, the right mix where we get that successful balance between time at home and time in the workplace. Towards the end of the report, and this is probably where Mark can come in, and feel free if you want to add any more comments here, Mark. There's there's an update around the estate and the use of accommodation and how we've managed that during COVID, and whether that be keeping buildings safe or how the estate has flexed in terms of responding to the different levels of lockdown that we've faced. And again, once again, some plans for the future around how we might redesign our office space going forward, and what some of the estate rationalisation plans look like going forward. Mark will be able to comment on those today if there's any questions. But really happy to hear views from Scrutiny members around the report, the content, and future plans.
Thanks, Graham. Mark, do you want to pick up and then we'll go to questions and comments?
Yeah, I certainly can do, Councillor Harland. I think, as Graham has said, there's been a lot of work undertaken to remobilise the estate to what we've got today versus what we had closed down during the first lockdown. So there's been a lot of work undertaken to make buildings COVID secure and provide space, particularly for staff who are struggling working from home with particular health and safety or well-being requirements. So that's probably a key thing to just reflect on. In terms of where we go in the future, one of the key findings from the work from home survey was that, and I think this is consistent with the office sector as a whole, that actually the expectations and requirements of our workspaces will change over time. The expectations among staff will certainly change, and that actually to support that greater level of flexibility between working from home and working in an office space, actually it's going to, the workspace is going to be more pointing towards collaboration, team working, training, development, etc., rather than people sat there from 9 till 5 every day at a desk. So I think that really then brings us on to thinking about actually how can we maximise the flexibility and utilisation of our retained estate, what we can release as a result, but do so in a way that starts to try and support regeneration of some of the local centres that we've got. So where we've got office accommodation in places such as Armley or Seacroft, for example, actually how can they be used on a more flexible basis, which could then drive in more spend into those local communities and so on. So the report goes into more detail about what that collaboration space looks like, and it's different for every person that you speak to. It also talks a bit more about that regeneration opportunity, how we're working with services and so on. So would welcome comments and questions around that in more detail.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Lewis, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I think, first of all, this work is sort of, in my mind, is very clearly split into two things. I think it's recognising the changes that were made after the stay-at-home order in March that was handed down from the government, and also about how we take that forward when people can return to the workplace but may not wish to do so in the same fashion. So I think in terms of the first one, I mean, again, as the report sets out, I think a huge amount of work was done to get people working from home safely and comfortably. And as officers said, you know, there are a number of staff who for home working wasn't suitable accommodation was made for them to work in offices. I think looking forward, I think I would be very clear. So pre-lockdown, staff had an option to work from home if they chose to. And I think moving forward, what we're looking at doing is we won't make it a requirement for staff to work from home if they are not at the moment. What we're looking at is how can we support staff who may have learnt may want to work differently to do so, but not, like I say, not be requiring staff to work from home, because we know it's not the right thing for everybody. Again, as you know, the austerity cuts continue to bite, and we know we'll have a lot less staff moving forward. Again, it's only, you know, it's axiomatic that following from that is a reduction in the amount of office accommodation we have. One of the feedback I've had from staff in my portfolio is where they might, as again, the officer said, may not want to sit at a desk from 9 while 5. Actually, where staff meet up and collaborate, they do want to do that post COVID in our buildings. And I think to make the council work effectively, you know, we shouldn't be holding that work up because there's not enough meeting rooms that 20, 30 people can meet in, for example, practical challenges like that. So adopt our workspace for more of that work rather than ranks of desks there. Again, it's always going to be an incomplete piece of work until we see exactly what the end of this process is. Again, I'm very mindful in terms of our office accommodation, particularly in the city centre. We haven't got a lot I don't expect Scrutiny Board members to recommend that we sell the Civic Hall, for example, or anything like that. So actually our options for reducing the number of buildings overall is quite limited. I think we discussed before, Merry and Enterprise House are very long-term arrangements. But it is, again, looking at how we, where we base staff and how, like I say, how once all the restrictions are lifted by the government, how staff wish to work. Again, I'm aware that staff work in different ways. Obviously, there's a number of staff that it doesn't touch at all because they're out delivering services anyway, who aren't office based. There's a number of staff who do what I would loosely term as field work. So they go and visit people and buildings and locations. And again, staff work in those situations should be equipped so they don't have to go from home to a base to go and do that work if they don't need to. And then finally, like I say, it's the more office-based staff who may not want to come in every day. I have to say, speaking personally, I don't miss Selby Road at 7:15 in the morning in my car or on a bus. But obviously there are going to be meetings where we're going to have to come back and meet up together. And again, that's just us as council. I think that reflects across the workplace. I think, like I say, I'm very clear we don't have answers to this at the moment, but I think it's a really useful paper and really useful to get members' input in about how we take this work forward.
Thank you, James. Neil, do you want to add anything before we go to questions?
Yeah, I just think it's probably just worth saying something about just the variety of experience that people have. That actually the majority are, I take an example like, are you better off? I think the majority are saying actually they're saving money because they're not traveling. Another 40% doesn't make any difference, but actually 6-7% saying that they are worse off. Equally, people in terms of happiness, most people okay, but around about 14-15% who are really struggling, and I think we can't just, because maybe we've got minority numbers, we can't ignore the problems which those people really are experiencing. So I think finding solutions is we need some flexibility in there which sort of take account of the way different services can be effective, but also how different individuals can be effective too. And I suppose the last point is, we were doing some work through the Scrutiny Board on the state rationalisation. So in some senses, it's just been a massive acceleration of some of the trends which were there before. But I do actually agree with the point which Mark and Councillor Lewis referred to, is that actually it has almost like taken us beyond where we thought, where we were looking at maybe crunching as many people into small spaces as possible and hot desking and so forth. Actually, I think it does take us to a position where we are thinking what people maybe want more than anything else is actually some sociability. Is actually, if they're effective at home, actually doing the paperwork, if you like, what they need is actually places to actually collaborate and talk to each other, and that has all sorts of implications for layout and the way that we use our buildings. So that's going to be maybe a different direction than we thought 6-7 months ago, and I think that's going to be an interesting one for Scrutiny to have a look at. I'm not sure that we'll get to tennis tables and bean bags, but that sort of direction, I guess, is more on the cards than maybe it felt 6-7 months ago.
Thank you. The report refers to the Pulse survey, and I thank you for the verbal update so far. But it'd be really interesting if we could look at those results in a lot more detail. I'm assuming the board would be interested in that, to dig a little bit deeper into the staff survey. Okay, thank you. So I've got Councillor Sam Firth.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, actually, the one thing I can see is that actually it seems that happiness is improving, as it's increased by 4%, that more people are more happy to work from home. And maybe that is through the support, but also the amount that are unhappy are actually decreasing at the same time, which is very interesting. So following on from those points, although I would like to get a bit more sociable, as we're all suffering from cabin fever. I just wanted to ask one quick point about the situation with regards to devices. It says in the report there's about 11,000 devices and IT equipment that's been provided, majority of which has been provided from the estate that we already had, or from the equipment that we had in stores. Is this, given the fact that we're now planning to make our more workspaces and hubs more of a collective space rather than somebody's actual workplace in the future, is that going to be a potential trend of potentially increasing in the future? And could you give us any sort of view about the spend that's had to take place and any additional equipment or requirements that have been needed with regards to IT and working from home? Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, who'd like to take that one? Graham?
I'll come in with some facts, Councillor Firth. So in terms of the latest figures about the level of kit that we've distributed, I think the running totals around 15,000 different bits of kit we've got out there, and that ranges from things like monitors to keyboards, mice, but also some furniture, so chairs and desks that people have needed to work effectively. And I think it's fair to say that what we've been doing initially is making sure that people are safely and properly equipped at home to enable them to work from home at short notice. As the report says, we've looked to recycle wherever we can. The types of things that I think we've needed to source from outside are potentially things like tables, which may, because not everybody's home environment allows them to fit in one of the big council desks, and it doesn't really work. So there are some health and safety compliant tables that we've brought in that are slightly smaller. And it's those type of areas where we've had to buy in new from outside. In terms of costs, I'll have to go away and get those figures for you, but rest assured that all of the distribution of the kit has been monitored through an online system, so we know what's gone where, and we'll be able to get that information for you.
Thank you, Graham.
Oh, sorry, somebody else. Somebody else going to speak. Sorry,
Sorry, Councillor Firth. Yeah, the only thing I was going to add was that in terms of where we've taken that furniture and equipment from, we've very much prioritised it based on the buildings that were closed at the time and most likely to remain closed. And we've also had the flexibility because of the need to apply social distancing. That even in places like Merrion House, where clearly we are going to occupy it longer term, rather than purchasing any new furniture or equipment, we've been able to take that away from the desks that just can't be occupied because of the social distancing requirements at this point in time.
Oh God, Sam, do you want to come back?
I don't know what's happening here. Is it my internet or something else?
No, it's me.
No, don't get me wrong. I've got low bandwidth as well. So, no, appreciate those answers. The reason why I'm asking is just simply because as this was probably fast forwarded what was going to be coming in the coming decades. The reason I'm asking is just simply because of two questions, really, and you've answered one of them, which is whether it's going to be probably a upward trajectory, whether this is going to increase in the future in terms of a spend, in terms of that, but also you've applied some of that, and also whether we're now, as a smaller question, whether we're going to need to replace some of that equipment when it comes to the fact of then we are hopefully, with the prospect of a vaccine, maybe back in the office. But that is more of a rhetorical question, because I appreciate you can't answer that at this moment in time. But thank you very much, Chair, for those.
Thank you, Sam. Now I've got Matthew, Simon.
Sorry, Chair, can I just pick up a point?
You can. Yep.
I didn't mean to put in there. Just pick up a point Councillor Firth made and you made, Chair. So you referred to the well-being surveys, and I have had the opportunity to see them in some detail, which I know the board haven't, and we're more than happy to share. The point I would make, and Councillor Firth picked it up, is the June survey did show kind of almost like a movement in both directions. So staff were either happier or unhappier. There was less of a middle ground, and I think. I just wanted to underline the point that, again, Graham made in the introduction, that it is, for me as a portfolio holder, and I know for officers working in it, the staff that are unhappy or uncomfortable working from home are ones that I don't don't want to lose sight of in the short term. And I know we've sort of put a real emphasis on getting managers and HR to follow up staff with issues that are flagging up, not in terms of a survey and a percentage, but as a individual, what can we do to help us? As it said in the report, there have been several hundred of those calls. Again, we have tried to, for staff who coming back to the office for various reasons is being something that's been identified. We have supported that. I don't want to sort of move away from the fact that there are people working from home isn't the right solution. We have supported. We are following up people who have found difficulties with working from home. And I don't want to lose that point at all, because there are giving staff more options, and as Councillor Firth says, there's been a lot of change happened very quickly. There are positives for both staff and the organisation, but I don't want to lose the point that we really are focused on those staff who have had to work from home, and it hasn't been a great experience.
Thanks for that, James. Useful comments. Okay, Matthew Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few quick questions, and hopefully officers or Councillor Lewis can point me in the right direction. You mentioned about selling Civic Hall. Is there a list of buildings that are off limits and are not going to be included in any future proposals? That would be useful to know. As we have a director who is very keen on cycle to work, how does this affect the cycle to work schemes if more people are working from home? And the third question is about well-being, and maybe for Graham on this one. I've had lots of conversations with officers since March, many of them saying they don't have to make the hour-and-a-half journey into the office and in the morning. They'd have to make the hour-and-a-half back, and that means they can offer more time to working. That's very good of them, but we pay them to work the hours they do, not to work more hours than they do. And I worry that this argument about productivity becomes what I've seen happen with some officers, where they are on Zoom meetings from 9 till 5, and it is just constant. There is no downtime, and there is none of that interaction with colleagues and support that's available. And how are HR seeking to address that?
Graham, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Councillor Robinson. And as you say, we've had lots of conversations around this, and I think what's right to say and acknowledge, I think, straight away is that, during COVID, lots of council staff have put so much effort in, across the piece, and that then we really, really respect and value that. But you're right, in terms of longer term, we need that balance, don't we, between flexible working patterns, working at home, the number of hours people put in, and offering the best of both in terms of, people doing what they need to do work-wise, but also having that improved flexibility that working from home offers. So we're doing a number of things. So, for example, we're going to roll out quite a lot of training and support packages and resources to help managers and teams to adjust to this new way of working. And right at the heart of that will be the conversation about maintaining well-being of all staff. And remember, it's not just staff as well, but also line managers and senior managers. That same support needs to be in place for them. So we'll be doing that, and as part of our future working from home approach, I think what we'll need to do is take a look at, and we'll agree this with the trade unions, and we'll engage staff around this, is what does the new typical working day look like, and how do we make sure that as teams we spend valuable time together, individuals get the benefit from that increased flexibility. And lots of them have mentioned that, Councillor Robertson, in terms of the less commute, and the more time to spend at home with family, and that improved flexibility. But I think organisationally, we need to come together and work together to agree how this now works going forward. So I think there's more conversations to be had there. But well-being, obviously, at the centre, and we've also just, during COVID, revamped our wellbeing offer, and I think that was referenced in the paper. So please take a look at that in terms of really broad wellbeing offer in terms of physical, mental health, financial wellbeing. There's lots and lots of support already out there that's been improved during and grown during COVID. So we're now trying to make sure that all of our staff and teams really access that when they need to.
Thanks, Graham. Mark, do you want to answer about the selling off of the Civic Hall?
Yes, we're not selling off the Civic Hall. Yeah, I think it's a valid point because you know, clearly we are going to have a retained estate, and we've already identified a number of properties that we will be retaining no matter what. I mean, clearly we've got Merrion House, which has seen we've only been back in there a short number of years after quite significant improvement in investment. So that has the basis for providing that sort of flexible space. The Civic Hall equally will be our other main city centre office building. I think as we move out to the localities, as I say, there's some really important buildings that we've got out in the localities, and I think what we're really wanting to do in the future is make sure that where we've got some sort of front office function, that the back office space within those buildings is as flexible as possible. So again, trying to marry up the front facing and back office functions as much as we can. That said, equally, there's some really, I suppose, more specific and unique work that's undertaken in some of those locality buildings, particularly around adults and children's social work, and we're working with those teams at the moment to really understand what they need in the future, and that may well change what we've got. But I think, you know, I've certainly talked at Scrutiny previously around how we look at that rationalisation programme, and you know, there's a number of key factors in there, ranging from the running costs of those buildings, the level of investment that has been delivered in recent years, what the backlog maintenance looks like, and I suppose linking all of that in then to look at actually what the likely investment would be moving forward to make those buildings greener, more fit for purpose, etc. So I think yes, you know, the Civic is in many ways not an easy building when you take all of those factors into account, but nevertheless it is a civic building, and one that we recognise needs to be retained within the estate. I think just on the cycle to work element, that and I'll let Neil maybe answer something around that as well, but from an estate perspective, I think it's quite an interesting one for us, because I think, you know, a lot of the investment that we've been looking at in buildings and delivering in buildings as we've brought forward schemes in recent years has been very much based around having you know, a number of people, or you know, I suppose the majority of people coming into those buildings and leaving those buildings within a number of hours of the day. So, you know, predominantly between 7 and 9 in the morning and maybe 4 till 6 in the afternoon. And obviously that then drives a certain model of delivery within the building itself in terms of changing facilities, storage facilities, etc. Now, if we're looking at more flexibility as to the way in which staff are working, and maybe, you know, people not necessarily coming in between those hours and maybe coming in, you know, for in a more distributed way through the day, then actually that might change the type of and the nature of investment that we deliver. Now, we've not done that level of work, that level of detailed work to understand what that might look like at the moment, but I think it's worth just acknowledging that some of these trends are likely to you know, deliver slightly different solutions for the buildings, and that will have some positives in terms of the spend, but also that flexibility in the space that actually needs to be taken for some of those facilities as well.
Thank you, Mark. Neil?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've heard the term coined living at work rather than working from home. It does feel a bit more like that at times. And I think actually the point Graham made is important, actually, that we need to be conscious of that. We can't wish the work away, but we do need to actually be, you know, building up backup plans for people and making sure people take breaks and taking leave, because we don't want people to be falling over in what are going to be a very crucial next 6 months in front of us. So we are alive to that. It's easier to say it than to do it at times, but it's actually helpful, I think, that members recognise the need for that to happen too, actually, and will support people in, if you like, taking time out. On the issue of the bike to work, I think there is some guidance in there. I can't quite remember, but is it half the time I think you're supposed to be using your bike to come to work? I think it's an interesting one at the moment. Obviously, it's all rather up in the air, given that people are told that they must stay at home if they can work from home. But I think there is something actually about also just encouraging people to actually take exercise, which shouldn't be ignored either. Actually, it feels, again, I'm sure for many of us, we're kind of welded to our seats at the moment, and whether it's cycling to work or actually just cycling around the block or taking a walk around the block, it's important actually that people get exercise and keep their well-being going through that route as well. Okay.
Thank you, Neil. Is that all right by you, Matthew?
Can I just say, hearing a member of the Conservative group campaigning for not an hour on the day or an hour off the day, I'm glad we finally, got to the bottom of the 1920s general strike here and a broad base of support.
Nicely put, Councillor Lewis.
I'll send you a trade union membership form, Matthew.
Matthew.
Always happy to surprise people. Just to check with Mark, you mentioned Civic and Merion. Were there any others that were in the off-limits list? And I appreciate you might not be able to rattle them all off today. You might want to share it with the board after.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say I'm more than happy to share something afterwards in terms of the properties that we've identified for retention. But there's no surprises on there in terms of the ones that we've invested in recently, like Albion House and others over at Yeadon. Sorry, Councillor Lewis.
Sorry, Matt. This is one of the problems on Zoom. You have to try not to talk over each other.
Who's chairing this meeting? Can I ask? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Councillor Harland. I think again, it's buildings, like I say, buildings that we have recently spent a lot of money on are obviously ones that we're not going to come out of, because essentially it's I said the Civic Hall flippantly. Obviously, we're not going to come out of there. It's ones where it's ones where there's value to money, value for money. Can we? Is it going to cost a lot to do it up? Can we easily relocate the services? Have we spent a lot of money on it recently? Those are the kind of decisions we're going to make. So, for example, buildings that we may have leased in and there may be penalty clauses to coming out of that lease, which aren't value for money, is one thing compared to, like I say, buildings we've recently invested in. Again, I said it in my introduction, I won't repeat myself, but I don't think we don't know where the end point of this is yet, and I think I'd make that very clear. But I think having some of the principles to take us forward, it's really important to understand at this point. Thank you, Chair. Apologies for interrupting.
Thank you, James. Matt, have you got anything else?
No, thank you, Chair. I'll shut up now as well.
Well, I'm conscious of time, but I'm pleased to know that the Civic Hall is on the off list, because I still get the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as the privilege of walking through those doors, I've got to say. Okay, I've got Simon and then Mirelle.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, picking up on the surveys. So this has been sent out to 8,000 staff, but only 4,500 responded. What are we doing to mop these up to make sure that we're hearing all staff's issues? Because potentially it's over 2,000 people that don't feel happy and don't feel productive in the work, which is large numbers. So thank you.
Graham, are you going to take that one?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I'll come in with that. So we were really pleased with the level of return that we got on the survey. So 5,000 to 8,000 gives us a really good sense of staff views, and we know from all the work that we've done previously that gives us an accurate view, across the wider workforce too. Having said that, you're right, in terms of when you look at that at face value, not all of the 8,000 responded. So what we continue to do, and we'll always do, is really reinforce the importance of each line manager being in regular contact with their members of staff and their teams. And not rely on surveys, but encourage that everyday conversation to make sure that everybody's well-being is being properly heard and supported. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is during November and through to January, we're going to rebrand our mid-year appraisal conversations that we normally have to be more about a check-in, which will focus on well-being for staff. So between now and January, individual one-to-one conversations to make sure that people have the opportunity to share, any issues they have and get the support that they need.
Thanks, Graham. Do you want to come back, Simon?
No, that's it. Thank you. As long as it's been followed up, I appreciate that.
Mirelle?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, has the new way of working had any impact on service delivery? And how's that going to be measured sort of going forward? And it's a two-way thing, whether it's our customers, our residents using the services, and also for members of staff, if they feel that maybe they're not being supported as well as they could be. Thank you.
Who wants to take that one?
Can I come in terms of the staff side? It's a really good question, isn't it? And one of the questions we asked in the survey was whether people felt they were working productively at home and had everything that they needed to do so. And the numbers were pretty positive around that, in terms of nearly 8 out of 10 people said that they could work productively and effectively just as they would do in the office. So that was positive. But you're right, and it's one of the questions in terms of as an organisation, we need the proper checks and balances in place as well to make sure that service delivery is being maintained. And I guess the proof of the pudding there really is how the organisation has kept the city running through COVID, and all the really great work we've done in really difficult, challenging times. So that's, and I know that's quite an anecdotal answer, but each and every team, there'll be a story of the support that's been provided, the service that's been delivered, and the real impact that we've had out there for people in the city. So I think one of the things we're probably going to need to do is make sure that as a council, we take a step back and we really appreciate and pull together that story of just what we've delivered during COVID times.
Thank you, Graham. Neil, do you want to come in on the service delivery?
Yeah, it is a tricky question to answer fully. I think there are certain services where certainly the feedback is actually they are as or more productive. I get areas like legal and finance in my own department where I think people have adapted very well, and in terms of the amount of work that people are getting through, there's really strong evidence for that. I think there are some other things where actually I think we learned some lessons out of the first lockdown. If you take something like housing, there were things like which got stopped around things like estate walkabouts, some kind of direct contact with individuals, which actually couldn't be really replicated from home. And actually with risk assessments, we've kind of found ways to actually continue to do that this time through this process, through the second lockdown, because we recognise the importance of that type of work. I think there will be other areas, which is I think a legitimate area for inquiry going forward in terms of the balance we get between working from home and working in the office, about developing some kind of productivity metrics, if you like, to actually see that things are actually being done. And that's going to be we haven't been able to just do that instantaneously through the kind of lockdown period. But I think it is a challenge to us going forward to make the right judgments about what sort of balance we need to strike.
Thank you, Neil. Are you happy with that, Councillor Midgley?
I am, thank you.
Okay, before I take Peter, David, do you want to ask the question that you've posed on chat?
Yeah, so I didn't really want to make a big issue of it. It was, are we having to fully heat the Civic Hall for health and safety?
Yeah, where people will be in, we'll have to heat. I mean, I think one of the challenges for Civic Hall going forward is whether we can actually bring a bit more sensitivity to that heating system. We're connecting it with district heating, but people will know from the past it can be very cold, or sometimes you have to open the window because it's too hot. So actually a bit more sensitivity around thermostats and so forth will hopefully be able to heat the places where people are rather than places where people aren't.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Carlo, Peter.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's on a point I've raised a bit, but I'm always thinking about this when the buildings in communities is obviously the work that's been done around community hubs and such. That's done excellent work to then deliver services in communities, and so it was good to see one that this is really tied into that service review, because there may be buildings in our communities where it's better that the service comes to people than they all traipse into Merrion House and in order to access that service, and so that's an important bit of it. But it was good as well to see the acknowledgement there that some of those buildings and communities that we provide, because the council has to have an office somewhere, is an important aspect to that community. So some of the housing offices, for instance, on parades of shops are helping keep one of those parades open, help provide customers to those. So really looking at how those buildings provide the spend. So I think when we're looking at buildings to see whether or not they have a future, are we looking at whether as well taking into the aspect of service delivery within the community? So obviously we've got the community hubs, but in those areas where we haven't, it may be that those buildings could become shared functions where our council services are offered rather than purely being an office space.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Councillor Carlo, and I think probably just broadening it out as well in terms of working with partner organisations who are equally active in those localities. So I think, you know, we have some good relationships with health partners in particular, but I think you're absolutely right. We've you know, so some of this is going to be around how can service delivery be undertaken in a slightly different way, which may actually be you know, beneficial to residents across the city, as well as the services themselves. And actually, how can the buildings be a bit of a facilitator of that change? But you know, I think it's equally recognising that, and I think the paper talks about this to some degree, is that actually if we can have greater flexibility across our wider estate, that actually that can benefit you know, people's work-life balance, but also reduce travel demand and cost, and so on, which can clearly have environmental benefits as well. Because at the moment, I think because of the way that we are set up with bases in different parts of the city, you know, you do have situations whereby staff are crisscrossing the city several times a day in order to undertake the work that they're involved in. And so I think if we can bring that flexibility, it may help to address some of those issues as well.
Thank you, Mark. Is that all right with you, Peter? Okay, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Remember a couple of months' time we had a scrutiny, and we asked Mark to talk to ward members about the coming out with some buildings. So I'd just like to say thank you for in contacting us and giving us the update. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Di?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just on what Simon was saying there. Mark recently had a conversation about our heritage buildings, and you know, it's a hot topic in our area, and we do need to look at those buildings and the other centres that are in Rothwell and the ward.
Mark, can you arrange for that to happen?
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Chapman. We'll set something up outside of this meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no more hands and I'm conscious of the time. So we've already built in the possibility of this item coming back. It's obviously one that members are very interested in. So I'm sure Rob will be in touch with board members before the January meeting. I'd like to say thank you to all our guests for providing the reports and the answers that you've given. Once again, many thanks on behalf of this board to all the staff that have been working extremely hard in all areas. If you'd pass that on from the board, We really appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. You're now free to leave before we move on to our work programme. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, Lord Mayor.
Oh, of course, yes.
Mince pies.
Yes, Merry Christmas
you
to
in
the
January.
officers. You're not released yet, Jim, so...
Thank you.
Unless
Thank you.
Thank you.
something to tell us. I
Oh,
don't
sorry.
think he's not there.
Indeed.
A promotion there,
No mince
Councillor
pies.
Harland.
Not in a month of Sundays,
lacking
thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 10, the work schedule. Rob, is that over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just briefly, really. So obviously we've had a pretty full discussion there on that, the agile working estate rationalisation. So that will now likely come back in January, and I'll be in touch with the relevant officers on that. Other than that, January looks very finance-focused, initial budget proposals as well, and the financial health monitoring report. And as you can see, Appendix 2 sets it all out for you. So just to flag up the January meeting, really, Chair.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Any more comments on that? No? Okay. Sorry, come on, Sam.
No, I was just going to say further to what Councillor Midgley said about metrics for analysing the productivity and impact in terms of workflow was something I was going to ask. I think if we could build that into the work schedule somewhere with a particular look of how it's affecting the council's working generally, then that'd be great. And I think Councillor Midgley was right to bring it up.
Excellent. Yep, we can look at that. Not a problem.
Yep, no problem, yeah.
Okay, so our next meeting is on the 11th of January, as usual, pre-meet at 10. And it's been a challenging year, and no one could have predicted at our last meet public of 2019 that we'd have gone through what we have in 2020. So it's our last public meeting of the year. I do wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope it is a Happy New Year. And I hope it's one that we can go forward together and carry on. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for all the work you've done thus far, and much more to come. But always stay safe, take care, and it's been lovely to see you all.